So it's not too often that I get surprised by an upcoming release. I mean, up until this point we've covered a ton of games here on this channel, but I believe Returnal is one of the few games that actually manages to do that, and that's specifically because of one of its biggest twists, which is that roguelike element. Of course, this also being one of the first AAA roguelike games that we get to play, and we also get to play it exclusively onto the next generation. And there's a lot of things that I really enjoy about Returnal that I wanted to cover here in this video. Maybe you're deciding to play this game, maybe you're deciding to give it a look for the very first time, or maybe just curious what it is for a future purchase. Well, in this video we're gonna cover pretty much everything from the gameplay, the exploration, the combat, the story, and everything else in between, even the roguelike elements, since these are very important and these might just change the way we look at these types of games in the future, and maybe might even become an immediate cult classic, of course all depending on the reviews and its initial reception. But in the meantime, we will talk about 10 of the biggest things you need to know before actually playing Returnal, so let's jump right into it. Now, I was mentioning that roguelike element, so let's begin with that, because there's going to be a lot of replayability to this game. Now, current rough estimates put this game between 30 to 50 hours of gameplay, of course depending on your pace, depending if you're also covering the side content or how good you are at the actual game. But as it is with most roguelikes out there, replayability plays a huge role into the entire loop. Now, every single time you die in this game, you will begin what the game calls a completely new cycle, where you lose pretty much most of the items you've acquired, including like the weapons, weapon proficiency, consumables, and resources, but everything else like your data bank entries and other permanent unlocks such as your pistol, melee sword, and a few other key items that help you with exploration, they will still remain with you even in the new cycle. And it's usually these unlockable stuff that have to do with the exploration that are more permanent, while the combat and upgrade related stuff tends to get lost with each new cycle. Now, the maps in Returnal are going to change every single time you start a new cycle, as they are essentially procedurally generated each and every single time. This means that even though you are in a specific biome, you will still get to play in that biome, but the layout of the map and how rooms are going to be located is going to completely change, as well as of course the enemy spawns, the secrets, and everything else in between. This also brings us to the exploration bits of Returnal, and exploration is going to be a key role of the gameplay, as it is going to be extremely rewarding. There's going to be a lot of secrets and rooms and things to collect and uncover in Returnal, from alien language glyphs to upgrades to puzzles to secret doors, underground areas, and so on. And you kind of have a couple of options when it comes to these. You can either stay on the main path and just follow what the main story brings you to, but if you analyze the map, this will also show you lots of secret areas with side objectives and a lot of things to collect and uncover, most of which will provide great new upgrades to make you way better prepared for the challenges ahead. And there's definitely going to be a lot of challenges ahead, between the roguelike elements as well as the huge amount of enemies with very powerful and diverse attacks that you will fight against. You will definitely see a ton of that, which is why the combat was made specifically to be fast-paced, impactful, and most important, reward high skill. Now, running around lightning speed and avoiding enemy projectiles is going to be key to your survival, and it also helps that you have really powerful weapons and effects and upgrades that will help you to take you down enemies that much faster. Returnal is played in the third-person perspective. It's essentially a third-person shooter, but with a less emphasis on precision combat and more focus on speed and fast-paced reactions. That is why aiming in this game is going to feel pretty forgiving, as you only need to shoot in the enemy's general direction before the aim assist kicks in, but you can tune that up or down in the settings menu. You'll also use a combination of very diverse and powerful weapons, melee attacks, and dodging to make the most out of the combat, and of course those upgrades I was talking about. Now, as I've said, there's also an element of strategy when it comes to using these weapons. First of all, you do lose them if you begin a new cycle when you die, but there's a few permanent ones that you unlock that can help you in combat, especially against certain types of enemies, like for example the melee weapon that you unlock early on in the game, which is perfectly suited against enemies with shields to break down those shields and take down those enemies easily. But in the full game there's at least 10 weapon types in total to collect and use, and enough loadouts for them that you never have to feel bored by the combat. Each weapon has its own feel, but also strengths and weaknesses. So you start with a pistol at the beginning of the game. You never get to lose this despite of restarting cycles, but you do get to pick up other items from enemy drops, chests, and other secret areas. This includes everything from your regular carbines, shotguns, but there is way more on top, like hollow seekers and so on, that will make you feel truly powerful. The most important aspect of these weapons is that they all come with random alternate firing modes that change the way you shoot with those guns. Now think of these alternate firing modes as kind of like very deadly supers or ultimate abilities that will deal a lot of damage against enemies, but at the same time they also have a relatively long cooldown, which means that there's going to be a number of occasions in which you're going to have to make a decision to use these alternate firing modes or not, maybe to take down a quick boss down or an enemy that is way more dangerous than others, and there's other situations in there too, so just be mindful of these upgrades. This also feeds in with the really awesome adrenaline system. So Returnal has kind of like a kill counter, but not really, which comes in the form of this adrenaline system. Essentially, the more enemies you kill without being hit, the more adrenaline you generate, which also has the benefit that it will increase your damage as your adrenaline level increases. At the same time, enemies will also drop a lot more resources, so you're definitely encouraged to play at this high skill level. The downside is that if you do manage to get hit, your counter will reset back to 0 and you will have to build it back up. But luckily enough, you will do this over and over again over the course of even one single combat scenario, so it's not something you have to worry too much about, except, you know, just be mindful that it exists. Now this also brings us to the number 7 point on the list. We've talked about the biomes, we've talked about the fact that these are quite diverse, there's multiple of these at the same time, but what you need to know about them is that you're not always going to be able to explore them outright, and just like in many other games out there, you will encounter certain areas that at first are inaccessible. Reason being is that you're lacking a certain unlock or a way to traverse to that point, like for example a grappling hook and so on and so forth. Well, that is going to be one of the reasons that are going to pull you back into these early stages or into these early biomes to play again in them and reach those areas that you were first unable to access, in the hopes of getting some really awesome new secrets or some really cool unlocks. And this is going to play around with the enemies that you're going to find in these environments. There's going to be a lot of enemy types in the game that will be specific to each of these environments, to these biomes, and they will have very specific attacks. Some of them will try to overwhelm you with a number of particles thrown at you at every single moment. Some of them will try to charge you in, while others will try to slow you down. There's a pretty diverse set of enemies that come in all shapes and sizes, from smaller ones to big boss enemies that will completely fill your entire screen with particle attacks, which honestly is one of the flavors that add to how unique this game actually is. This brings us to the number 8 thing you need to know, which is the fact that this game also has an online component, as most games do these days, but don't get it twisted, it's not an online co-op, you don't have to worry about servers or connectivity issues, you can also play this game offline. It just has that really cool small little online feature that will even give you a number of benefits. So it's a little bit similar to the one in Dark Souls, for example, where when you're exploring you might find the corpses of other players that have died in other timelines. Now when you find these, there's a couple of options that you can pick between, one of which is the Avenge option, which also can give you some pretty awesome rewards like a very powerful weapon. The downside is that when you avenge a character like this, you might have to fight with a pretty powerful monster, which also adds a little bit to that high risk, high reward aspect of this game. Furthermore, there's another online component of it, which brings me to the number 9 thing you need to know, and that is the fact that you are going to be able to access challenges from within your ship. Now, these challenges are daily, and essentially they require you to complete certain parts of a biome or of the game under certain unique conditions, like for example limiting your access to weapons and skills, or by forcing you to improvise as you go. But the better you fare in them, the higher the score is going to be, which also means better rewards. But at the same time, there's also an online leaderboard where you can go ahead and compare your score with that of other online players. This finally brings us to the last point on the list, which is the story. Not all of Returnal is going to be fast action combat, and as a matter of fact, there are a lot of moments in there that bring you through this eerie sci-fi horror setting that is a part of the game. Now, there's going to be many sequences that will happen in the first person view, which add a lot to the immersiveness of this game. You're trying to uncover new clues about what's happening with the planet, as well as about your past, to uncover whatever is keeping you stuck into that time loop. There's many of these that will make the scenes a lot more personal and isolated. This is pretty much a psychological horror kind of game, so as you make breakthroughs in the main story and find more things about this alien planet you're stranded onto, you're going to go through these moments that will add a lot to that experience. But this is it with the 10 biggest things you need to know before playing Returnal. Of course, if you want to stay tuned with more Returnal content here on this channel, like tips and tricks, guides, secrets, and so on and so forth, definitely make sure you leave a like on this video, subscribe, and activate that notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next one.